Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this Tuesday, the 7th day of January 2014 worldwide transmission. Again, I'm your host, Alex Jones. There is so much insane news that we're going to be covering and breaking down today, obviously. Chicago has smashed all records for the cold. New York City breaks 118-year-old record. Chill map across the United States and Europe as well is just incredibly cold. Also, coldest air in 20 years. It's other parts of the United States. Solar pole is warmer. Hundreds stranded overnight on snowbound Amtrak trains. Power demand soars. Texas grid pushes to the edge because they've shut down a large portion of our power plants under Agenda 21. Indianapolis mayor, in 10 minutes, you could be dead from the cold. Escape inmate turns himself in. It was so cold. Climate change groups seek new leadership as movement loses steam. Meteorologist, Ghost is closing coal plants. Also, MIT climate scientist takes on the warmest. Time magazine blamed polar vortex on global cooling in 1974. Al Sharpton is donning a white lab coat. That's some of the news I see up on Drudge. 90% of the United States is frozen. That is just some of the news on that front. All over the United States, the police are intimidating people into giving blood and saliva samples. Voluntary government checkpoints spark backlash. There should be a massive backlash. Also, we've got huge Obamacare news. We've got news on the economic front, huge news on the Fukushima front, and several guests that are coming up today. We'll be checking in at the bottom of this hour with Leanne McAdoo, who is in downtown Austin at La Vaca and Cesar Chavez, right in front of the Austin City Council, where there are groups down there on a hunger strike to force the city to remove hydrofluorosilicic acid and other poisons from the water supply. We're going to check in with her for about 10 minutes at the bottom of the hour. If you're out there driving, listening to us on the local AM or FM stations, it's important to go down there in the next 30 minutes and park, or to drive by honking, to drive by with your radio turned up, so that everyone knows that we are aware of what's happening, so that hunger strikes and other protests against fluoride, GMOs, you name it, can only intensify. Will we save the world with this one protest? No. But we will engage in the act of education, enlightenment, and resistance that will end up bringing the globalists down in the final equation. And that's what we're talking about here today. So it's now time to get down there, and you can also meet some of the InfoWars crew, John Bound and Leanne McAdoo, who are now making their way down there right now. There's a ton of insanely important bizarro news up on Infowars.com. MSNBC pundit calls on Obama to govern by decree. Decree means by dictate, or in the Latin, dictatorship. So to rule by dictatorship. Scientists discover conjoined gray whales dying near West Coast as other animals die en masse from the radiation. Meanwhile, they had professors in the news denying West Coast radiation linked to Fukushima, saying it must be red silverware. Yes, and elves, too, or maybe pixie dust. 500% radiation increase from red-painted disposable eating utensils. Seriously? Retired Air Force colonel with 3 graduate degrees is homeless and sleeps in a van. Well, there's laws against that colonel. We're going to put you in a FEMA camp. J.P. Morgan pays $2 billion to avoid prosecution for its involvement in Madoff Ponzi scheme. New York declares state of emergency ahead of polar vortex winter storm. They ought to name the storm Gore. A team of reporters, Jakari Jackson, Adon Salazar, and others to the West Coast. They're going to go to San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and all the way up the coast to Seattle, getting measurements every 50 to 100 miles. There are obviously citizen journalists everywhere going out and getting readings, some of which are 10 times normal levels. On average, in areas of San Francisco, they found levels 5 times higher. The county health department went out with their own Geiger counters and found exactly the same numbers. And we're going to send our reporters to near the same spot. We're trying to find the same spots they mentioned and list in the news reports. But then we're going to survey other areas. First, they're going to go to San Francisco. Then they're going to go up the coast, north, through Northern California, Oregon, Seattle. Then they're going to fly back down to Southern California and survey San Diego, Los Angeles, Long Beach, right down to the border. Then they're going to come back to Austin. So they're going to be gone a week. And they're going to be popping in daily with reports and on the nightly news, giving us their findings with 4 different Geiger counters. I bought 5 Geiger counters. We're going to keep one here in Austin and do our own test of seafood. It's really time to plunge into this and expose what's going on. So Dr. Christopher Busby will be joining us at the start of the next hour. And then William F. Jasper, he was on with us about a month ago, and he promised to come back in the new year to cover the convergence of global governance and how they transfer local and national and individual sovereignty to these unelected globalist corporate boards. So that is coming up as well today. We are going to have Leanne McAdoo pop in at the bottom of the hour for about 10 minutes in downtown Austin at the corner of Cesar Chavez and La Vaca in front of the globalist Agenda 21 command base known as the City Hall, right out in front of the Willie Nelson statue. We're going to have Leanne McAdoo out there with the group that is hunger striking into day 9 now to draw attention to the deadly hydrofluorosilicic acid, or sodium fluoride, that's being added to the water supply illegally under the Geneva Convention against forced medication. And, of course, it causes lowered IQs in Harvard studies, you name it, gives people pancreatic cancer, bladder cancer, kidney cancer, bone cancer. All the studies are on record. It's incontrovertible. All the EPA and FDA scientists, literally the vast majority of them, have gone public and tried to get the government to change this. They had new regulations 2 years ago ordering it to not be used in pesticides anymore. It's so deadly. And it bioaccumulates in the plants. So it is truly amazing that this continues. It is a eugenics program. Now, that said, ladies and gentlemen, Chicago has smashed its all-time record cold temperature numbers. That is being reported on by NBC Chicago. Also, New York City breaks a 118-year low. Al Gore says it's caused by global warming. Average temp in the USA is 19.4 Fahrenheit, or quite a few degrees below freezing. What's freezing? 32 on the Fahrenheit scale. So that's a good 14 degrees under there. Coldest air in many areas of the country in 20 years. Hundreds stranded overnight on snowbound Amtrak trains. Power demand soars. Texas grid pushes to the edge because about a third of our power plants have been shut down by not even executive orders, just global treaties circumventing Congress illegally. So the dirty plants right over the border are having to turn up their production in Mexico to all-time highs. The Indianapolis mayor says you could die outside in 10 minutes. You could, quote, be dead. Escaped inmate from the cold turns himself in. Climate change groups seek new leadership as movement loses steam. It doesn't matter if it loses steam. In Europe, in the United States, and in England, they're shutting down the clean coal power plants, even new plants that were built in Texas and in Wisconsin. Brand new plants, some of them costing $1 billion apiece. The one in South Texas cost $3 billion. Took 7 years to build, and it's been closed before it opened on completion. There was a plant built up by Green Bay that cost close to $1 billion to be owned by the state and the cities. Totally clean-burning coal plant with the scrubbing systems. When you drive by a new coal plant, you notice it's got like 4 or 5 buildings attached to it. That's the scrubbers. Nothing comes out of it but water and carbon dioxide. Nothing. So they list carbon dioxide as a pollutant. The EPA does. And you now cannot have that plant. And so your electric cars get their power from coal, 50+%, and your homes get it. And so what's going to happen? Your power prices are going to what? Explode. And it doesn't matter if it's discredited. Now, I told you they were already doing this in Europe. They banned the new production of space heaters 3 years ago. They've banned the new construction in Germany and other countries under EU rules of single-parent or single-family dwelling homes. Daddy, mommy, and the kids. That is illegal to build new ones. You can only live in basically new coffin buildings, new coffin size, 250 square foot systems. San Francisco's doing it. New York's doing it. You can pay exorbitant prices and a special tax and get out of that bracket, but only the elite can do it. Then they could take almost all your disposable income and tax. So this is the bureaucrats have brought in austerity. That's to make you so poor that they can siphon off 90% of what you make. France is now doing this as well. Then they could take your tax money and build the robots to replace you in the factories, the robots in the fields, the robots to do the fighting, the robots to do the flying, and then you get it. Once we're fully locked down in coffin cities, in coffin buildings, in coffin apartments, then the loving bioweapons are released. And they're only building up the attacks right now, testing their new viruses. They admitted in the H1N1 shots, they added the year before the H1N1 itself as a, quote, tracer virus. And it wasn't a big scandal that, oh, secret testing in the flu vaccine. It was a minor academic footnote that they put H1N1 out a year before and then designed it as a basic viral form of biological nanotech, is what they call it, to mutate into H1N1 the next year. I mean, you're living in Buck Rogersville with total eugenics criminals doing whatever they want. Speaking of that, here's a CBS News report. You hear about a little girl goes in to get her tonsils out and flesh-eating bacteria eat her brain. Report, girl falls asleep up to 30 times a day after getting flu shot. And the insert says it can give you narcolepsy. I know about, 7 or 8 people, some acquaintances, some friends who didn't listen to me over the years and got the flu shot in Austin, who now have narcolepsy and can't drive, and epilepsy or Guillain-Barré's, or all three. 2 of the people I know have Guillain-Barré. They still have, years later, their hands are numb, their feet are numb. It's not the really bad type where you stop breathing. And then they fall asleep in traffic, and they have seizures now. Just a wondrous new system. I know a talk show host who had Guillain-Barré real bad for about a year. He still has a little bit of it. His toes are numb. And he still thinks I'm wrong, though, about it. It's good to take the shot and have your feet, your toes paralyzed. It's good. It's a good thing. And I'm wrong, you understand. Just like we're wrong about radiation increased levels being bad. But I told you this was coming. EPA proposes restrictions for new wood stoves. They say they're above the law. Supreme Court's ruled that Congress can't affect them. They can do whatever they want, and so they're dictators. Just as MSNBC pundit has now called on Obama to govern by decree. That video clip's coming out in the next segment. And they've said they're going to cut the emissions you're allowed to put out of a fireplace or wood stove by 80%. And this has already begun all over California. We've gotten the calls and seen the little blurbs in the news where code enforcers come and give you tickets for your fireplace. And they're sending armored vehicles out to rural areas all over California as the test. And they show up with SWAT teams with no warrant and raid your house when they see smoke coming out to put a detector on it and say too much smoke's coming out. There's not even a law. They just, it's kind of like we caught Austin giving mainly old people and then taking their property with $2,000 a day fines back in 1997. There's a video of it on YouTube that we re-uploaded. And they give them $2,000 a day fines for 3-inch grass. And when we mowed the old guy's lawn who just had colon surgery for Roland Ellingson and tried to reverse it, they kept giving him the tickets because we learned a realtor worked with the city wanted his property. It was a gentrified area over off 37th Street, West 37th. Those houses go for millions today. And they still gave him tickets. They said, well, we just find that dead grass under that tree unacceptable because the city ordinance said weeds, debris, or anything that they find objectionable. They are God. Your garden in the backyard is unacceptable. Your stoves are unacceptable. They're going to ban everything. They're coming for you. They're not going to stop. They're criminals. And they discovered that universities under EPA grants were pumping massive levels of particulates secretly onto students in the test to make them ill to then claim that an incredibly low level of particulate is bad for you. Well, obviously, particulates aren't great for you. Obviously, if you go out camping for a week and sit around a campfire, you might cough some. All secondhand smoke isn't good for you. But they're going to use this to shut down people being able to have their own wood stoves and be self-sufficient. And there's massive studies about how potash going into the atmosphere helps create rain, helps fertilize, how the carbon dioxide is good for the atmosphere. It's what plants breathe. But obviously, it's not good for you to sit there and huff it and breathe it at point-blank range. Living is dangerous. Too much sun is bad for you. And they want to make it illegal to suntan. Cass Sunstein, the White House regulations are. If you don't get sun, you'll die even faster. Can't live with it, can't live without it. Look at this. EPA proposes restrictions for new wood stoves. Fox News. And the issue is they propose it, have a public comment, and then they just go, oh, we're not going to implement the 80% reduction. It'll only be 50. And then the bureaucrats, and it's already begun, come after you. They're going to ban the space heaters you see outside that have natural gas in them. Totally clean. What do you think makes the atmosphere? The volcanoes and the water and the cycle. We need fire. We need, they try to stop all the wildfires around the country. They won't let them do the fire breaks so the towns burn down, but then they'll go out and leave all the deadwood out there and then go fight it once giant fires. You're supposed to have fires burning down large areas of wilderness to then replenish the nitrogen and other things of the soil. Again, they're taking normal actions and banning it and restricting it. But then they're genetically engineering and releasing salmon to the ocean that are 4 times the size of the others and will breed out all the other salmon within 5 generations. By the way, that's 5 years. That's already begun. They are just doing every psycho thing you can imagine. Nuclear reactors leaking everywhere. All sorts of corruption. All the weapons they've produced. All the nuclear weapons. And then EPA proposes restrictions for new wood stoves. The Federal Environmental Protection Agency has proposed new standards for wood stoves that would reduce the maximum amount of fine particulate emissions allowed for new stoves sold in 2015, 2019. But then with it comes the harassment. They've already banned selling them in Europe. First they do this, just like the light bulbs have been banned, and then they keep phasing it in. Maximum emissions would be reduced by 1/3 next year and by 80% in the 5 years. Fine particulate pollution is made up of solid particles and liquid droplets that measure 2.5 micrograms in diameter or less. The EPA currently certifies non-catalytic wood stoves if they produce less than 7.5 grams of fine particulate per hour. And it says this could be, breathed and could be linked to heart attacks, decreased lung function. Yeah, when they pumped particulate in without people knowing it at more than 100 times safe levels. We exposed, David and I already worked here when this happened. We broke this last year and told you they were coming with all this. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, 5 times the radiation has been confirmed by the San Francisco Health Department. We're going to send our reporters there to talk to them. And they're like, oh, we don't know what it is. We don't know if it came from Fukushima. They can go look at those isotopes. They can do the test inexpensively. And they can tell where it came from. And you know where the stuff that hit 2.5 years ago from Fukushima came from? Fukushima. Berkeley and others did the test of what was in the rainwater they were collecting and other things and found, in some cases, 5, 10, 15 times the level of different isotopes. Generally 2 to 3 times. The government found out about what was happening with yellowfin tuna full of radiation and decided not to tell the public till a year later. This is the insanity, and it's up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. And there's new breaking news about snow in the Midwest having high levels of radiation we're going to be covering. That's up on DrudgeReport.com on the right-hand side. It's an article that Paul Watson put out last night. Meanwhile, scientists discover conjoined gray whale calves dying near West Coast. Scientists have never seen that before. It's incredible photos of the whales with 2 tails. And it's 2 heads. It's just truly monstrously sad. We're going to break all that down, play the clip where MSNBC pundit calls on Obama to govern by decree. Well, they already are. And the bureaucracy already is. Oh, we're not worried about 5 times the radiation. We're not worried about huge groups of debris from Fukushima about to reach the coast. We're worried about your wood stove you turn on once a month. We're going to ban your fireplace. We're going to send inspectors in. So that is going to be coming up tomorrow with David Knight. Again, we have Dr. Busby popping in at the bottom of the next hour about the increased radiation levels and the media blackout and the state playing dumb about where the radiation's coming from when they know full well they can go out and test the isotopes anytime they want. We've got conjoined calves, or that's Siamese calves, basically. Whale calves washing up on the California beach. I mean, this is getting crazy. That's up on Infowars.com. We're going to be breaking all of that down. And I just saw during the break, and after Leanne leaves us, I'm going to cover this. I was watching CNN in the coffee room, because, again, we have TVs on from all the establishment state-run media. We also have big screen computer screens up following web developments and following drudgereport.com, worldnetdaily.com, Infowars.com, the alternative real press. But it was Dennis Rodman with all the earrings and his stupid entourage from North Korea cussing and yelling at the CNN anchor, the establishment anchor, who tries to act like he's, you know, humanitarian himself when CNN's bought and paid for by other third world dictatorships on record that pay for much of its programming. We know that because of Amber Lyon blowing the whistle and others. The host is there criticizing Kim Jong-un, the stunted, demonic, supreme narcissist who has a 7-story pleasure palace and has his uncle fed to wild dogs and has his ex-girlfriend shot and uses mortars himself to execute his enemies who are chained up to poles. And you look at the crazed eyes of the ruling class there and how evil they look and how evil they act and how brainwashed the public looks. That's government. That's your total state. That's psychopaths ruling. And isn't it perfect that some child emperor, third-generation communist royalty, authoritarian, hereditary dictator, in the hermit, nightmare, dark age, Stalinist hell pit that is North Korea, for all you that love socialism and all communism and all its great failures, all of you that are threatened by the individual, threatened by liberty and the animating contest of freedom, you want to make us all join your trendiness. This is what it is. Play a little bit of the video just for a moment, just without the audio, just to see for TV viewers watching on prisonplanet.tv the ignorance of Dennis Rodman, the admitted drug addict, idiot, the trendy, with all of his moron followers around him, acting arrogant, defending Kim Jong-un. Dennis Rodman's been bankrupt repeatedly, is known to be a complete moron, a wash up. And there he is with a narcissistic, insane asylum North Korean dictator. And when you watch the film of them watching a baseball or a basketball game, all the dictators stand around looking, all the dictators' minions stand around just staring at Rodman and him, glowing on narcissistic power trips to be on TV worldwide and to be with Dennis Rodman. I mean, that's how disconnected they are. That I've hung out with, you know, his ex-wife, Carmen Electra, before at dinner in Los Angeles, and she seemed nice, but not all that smart, and I wasn't that impressed. I sure don't care about hanging out with her, and you couldn't pay me to hang around with somebody like Dennis Rodman. You couldn't pay me to be around that. I mean, that's how vapid and shallow it is that these people, whether they're Hollywood or whether they're U.S. politicians or dictators, they're a bunch of shallow, sociopathic control freaks, or sometimes psychopaths who are control freaks and are empty nobodies. And it just shows how when you worship the latest fad, the latest movie star, the latest music icon that the media pushes, Justin Bieber or whatever it is, when you follow that, because everybody says follow it, and you think you're buying into something that makes you successful, later you know how dumb it is. Like Britney Spears, been washed up for years. It's a joke. Michael Jackson, it's a joke. But the current ones, people won't admit it's a joke. But look at narcissism, where they're worshiping Dennis Rodman in North Korea, and he's a total joke here in the United States. And we have to negotiate with a hereditary third-generation dictator. As an ambassador, it's Dennis Rodman the joke. This is what a joke big government is. This is what a joke big combines and monopolies are when they're not free market and didn't gain their success through competitiveness. This is what we've become. Turn up some of the volume, then we're going to our street coverage of the fluoride event, because it just sounds so incredibly mindless. It is so insane, so off the chart, so bizarre, so pathetic, and just illustrates how people are literally...
Take the abuse. Do you have to take the abuse? Well, we gonna take it. Do you, sir? Let me know. Are you gonna take the abuse? We gonna get it. But guess what, though? One day,
ooh,
this door is gonna open, because these 10 guys here, all of us, Christy, Ben, Dennis, Charles, all these guys, everybody here, we could just open the door just a little bit for people to come here and do one thing.
Oh, I just can't handle it. Get it off. But then the CNN scum that are worse than Dennis Rodman, worse than Kim Jong-un, because they're trying to wreck America. They want to turn it into that. I mean, you can have a wood-burning stove in North Korea. You're not going to be able to have one here. They get to sit there and shake their heads and all feel good when they are all just as complicit in funding al-Qaeda, supporting al-Qaeda, promoting New World Order garbage. It's incredible. Now, shifting gears, Leanne McAdoo is downtown, and she'll be down there every day this week doing live coverage here on the syndicated radio broadcast, braving the record warm temperatures of global warming. If you just pay Al Gore money, a carbon tax, and don't let people have cheap electrical power or shut down their wood-burning stoves, it would not be so hot right now. She's down there. It's about 110 degrees, like the equator here in Austin. And she is down there wearing gloves in the middle of this heat wave, I guess about 20 degrees out there, with some folks that have come down there to be part of the hunger strike. And we want to see those numbers grow throughout the week, ladies and gentlemen, for a group that is protesting the fluoridation of water 5 years after we bring scientists and researchers and toxicologists and PhDs to speak to this city. They ignore us. They spend over $1 million a year to put it in our water that reduces IQ, gives you bone cancer on record, Harvard studies, you name it. But it doesn't matter. They keep putting it in there because they love us. They love us. They care about us. They're liberals. And so, Leanne, I'm surprised that you're not, that you're not wearing lighter clothes out there during the heat wave. How is everybody handling the heat wave out there?
I got to say, it feels great out here today. It could be the 5 shirts and 2 pairs of pants I'm wearing, but, I'm feeling good. We are getting a big crowd out here right now, some patriots and lovers of liberty in America. So many trucks are driving by honking. We're getting a lot of support today. That's what it takes. When we get people standing out here and showing that this is important to us and bringing light to this issue, while the elite sit up there in their ivory tower and look down on us. They see this group is growing. We're getting fed up. I'm out here with Jason and Nicholas. You guys, you're on day 9 of your hunger strike. You spent the coldest night of the year, record-breaking temperatures last night. You spent it outside. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling thrilled that the sun is out and shining. There's no clouds. It's a clear sky. There's not even fake clouds. It's just complete blueness, and it's warm. And
how about you, Nicholas?
Refreshed. It was really good to get some good sleep last night. We doubled up on sleeping bags, so we actually stayed pretty warm. It wasn't too bad. Got some face masks from supporters. It was really nice.
All right, I want to have Josh, who's out there, or is it John Bound with you, pan around and show the crowd that's behind you, because I heard them cheering earlier. And tell folks to cheer for getting the deadly poison out of our water. Come on, folks, yeah!
Getting the deadly poison out of the water! Woo!
That's awesome. And again, I hear a lot of trucks honking. We need more people to show up down there, and everybody needs to be down there tomorrow at 12:30 is when we need people to come out as well against fluoride. And who's this young man?
I've got a thought criminal right here. This is Alex Cobb, and he might be giving Little Jones a run for his money in his show of patriotism here. Why do you want to let the world know what's wrong with fluoride?
Because we don't want our pets drinking poison.
Exactly.
Hey, that's a good angle with the trendies. Explain that it really hurts animals. Because the trendies hate humans, but if we explain it's being done to dogs and cats, now that's an idea. Go ahead.
Let's see your signs.
Show me your signs, sir.
He's got his little homemade sign. It says,
there's poison in our water. We don't want our pets to drink poison. And this guy actually just schooled me, and he recited some of the Bill of Rights. He gave me my amendments, doing his thing. Guys, why are you out here? What do you think about the poison in tap water?
I think it's horrible. We're being forcibly medicated. It's just absolutely horrible. I don't know why they're doing it. I mean,
it's because they love us.
What is stop?
Because they love you.
They hate us, actually. They hate humanity. I mean, there's Harvard studies that have proven that it's lowering IQs. It's giving us all sorts of cancers. I don't know why it's in there. I mean, who can explain to us? I want to have a conversation with the city council members. Why aren't they out here talking to us? They haven't answered any questions about why there's fluoride in the water.
You know, that's a good idea. I think everybody should stay out there till noon, and then it's your city, it's your city council. You should all go into the city building and try to go to their offices and talk to them. Leanne, you could pop in at the bottom of the next hour, you and John Bound, and you could go in and demand to talk to Mayor Lee Leffingwell.
Exactly. Well, the city council, they're quite aware that these guys are out here, that they're on day 9 of their hunger strike, and they're pretty much just put their blinders up. They don't want to draw any attention to the fact that people in America are on a hunger strike. I mean, that is unheard of. It's just like when the guy emulated on the emulated on the lawn.
Or emulation, I think's the word. I can't even say it.
And the mainstream media was like, oh, some guy just set himself on fire at the D.C. Memorial today. No, this is real. People in America are getting tired. It doesn't matter how much fluoride you put in our water. You're not going to make us all docile. We're not going to sit around. We're not going to take it anymore. This is what we need to show these people. Have you seen the warning label? Woo!
Yeah.
Have you seen the warning label for hydrofluorosilicate?
Hey, wait a minute. That's how they shut down a lot of the things in Tennessee and places whenever they're sick and tired of them trying to raise taxes. We should ask all the truck drivers on I-35 and everybody else. I know you're getting gouged. You can barely afford the gas. They got police checkpoints, a white glove inspecting you. We need all the truckers and everybody else to go drive around the city headquarters, the city hall, to drive around Cesar Chavez and Lavaca in circles, honking their horns until 5 o'clock. Even if you're on the other side of town, folks, just come do it randomly at different times. Do 4 or 5 circles honking. Let's do it right now. Everybody start driving around in circles, honking around the building to let the criminals inside know we're not going to put up with them paying mafia groups to put $1,100,000 a year of deadly poison in the water from communist China. Go ahead, Leanne McAdoo.
Exactly. We are paying $800,000 a year for the city of Austin to put hydrofluorosilicic acid.
Well, they must have lowered the price. Well, that's a deal then.
Yeah. I feel like we're paying them to only put 0.7 parts per million in the water and not any more. If you look at the warning label, for those on the radio, we've actually tweeted this out at the InfoWars reports. If you're on Twitter, you can see the warning label. It says poison. It's got the skull and bones. Do not take internally. Avoid contact with skin, eyes, mouth, clothing. Avoid breathing. Use rubber gloves, respirators, all that. And then up here in the small print in the corner, directions for water fluoridation. What? That is insane. How do they get away with it?
Well, they say don't swallow any of the toothpaste or call poison control immediately. Then it becomes obvious it's a poison. Only take a little bit every day so you'll quietly die later and no one will know why.
Exactly. And there are groups that are working here to try and get the city to put a warning label on the water, and that's one good first step. But this is an election year. This is a time for people to really take a stand and let our representatives know that if they are not actually representing us, we're going to get them out of there. We're voting them out.
And I totally agree. And again, this is bigger than Austin, bigger than the U.S. In Europe, in Canada, in Australia, they're removing the fluoride out of the water in major cities. Then the feds are coming in and paying millions of dollars in lobbying, in the case of Tampa, to put the fluoride back in. Now they're voting to remove it again. The battle goes back and forth, but resistance is victory. Tell folks I want to hear their victory roar against those criminals inside there.
Or against the criminals!
Yeah! All right, pan around. More people are starting to show up out there. What are there, about 20 people out there, Leanne?
I'd say there are about 30 now. We've actually got some people passing out flyers on opposite corners so we can hit up all the cars that are, it's a kind of a five-way.
You're engaging in First Amendment? That should be banned. How dare you?
That's what we're doing out here. We are redressing for our grievances.
Yeah, I want big trucks driving in circles around there, laying on their horns. And then I want them, and if people do this all day, just truck drivers, as you come down by downtown, do 5 circles. If you're on I-35 anywhere, and citizens, you name it, drive in circles around there. Let's start honking, and then let's do it all tomorrow. Let's converge at 12:30 noon with your cars to drive for at least 10 minutes around it, honking to let the scum inside know that we're aware of their criminal activities.
And it's so encouraging to all of our listeners that are driving by, people that are slowly trickling in. It is so encouraging when you're standing out here, 9 days of a hunger strike. At first just started out, you too, they were just sitting here, by themselves.
And you ran into them, Leanne.
Yeah, and now look at this. The crowd is slowly growing. It's only going to encourage these guys who are planning on being out here on a hunger strike until the 23rd of January so that they can go to the first city council meeting and bring this up, which I'm pretty sure the city council plans on trying to ignore this and not bring it up.
Sure. I want to talk to more of the people when we come back. How dare her say fluoride's bad? Radiation's good, too. And we've got the crew down there on the streets here in Austin, Texas, where we broadcast from worldwide. Leanne McAdoo and John Bound are down there reporting. She'll be back on tomorrow at 12:30 Central. More trucks and cars are driving around honking. More people are showing up, surrounding the building, handing out flyers. And, of course, they're down there in record cold temperatures here in Austin, Texas. There's a hunger strike going on, and folks staying out there 24 hours a day to draw attention. Now, the people inside the building know if we ever expose that eugenics never ended and is ongoing with forced medication with a deadly poison to brain damage us and give us cancer, then the whole house of cards falls that they were a nanny state that loved us. No, they're authoritarian dirtbag scum. Leanne, any other points, and who's this gentleman you're standing with?
Well, first of all, I think it's ridiculous that people are still looking to the mainstream media and to the government to give us the official count on the radiation poisoning. I mean, they are actively poisoning our drinking water. Do we really expect that they're going to tell us about how deadly the radiation is that we're going to be Geiger countering on the beach in California in a day? It's ridiculous. I'm standing here with Scottish John.
Hello, Alex. How you doing, pal?
Oh, hey, how you doing, buddy? I've met you before.
But here, in the land of the free and the home of the brave, I didn't come to live as a slave. And those magnificent 7 deadly sins with their fat fluoride-free butts on that bench in City Hall need to leave town and take the fluoride with them. End the message. All the best to you, pal.
Hey, Leanne, I want you to get his name and number. I've run into him 4 or 5 times over the years. I want that guy to cut ads for us. You cannot ignore that great accent. Hey.
I've been trying to do it all day. That's wonderful.
No.
And here's Eric. Look at this guy. He's got his filtered water and his nascent iodine.
That's a terrorist right there.
He is a terrorist. Eric, why are you out here?
Just to remind, support everybody that we're under attack, and, it's time to stand up and, get this fluoride, especially from our kids. It's our future, and, everybody for that matter, and detox ourselves. And that's what I'm using, this nascent iodine every day.
Wow, we even got product placement. Well, thank you, brother. God bless you. That's how we fund the operation.
Dangerous. He's a free thinker. This is very, very dangerous.
Incredible. Well, tell folks, great job from me, Leanne. And we're going to be back with you tomorrow at 12:30 in the middle of the show. And the crowd will only build. Thank you so much, Leanne McAdoo and John Bound for Infowars.com. Yeah. All right, pan around, show the folks that are gathering there. There's more folks behind right there if he'll pan around towards the back, towards the other side. And they got people going around the building and cars driving around honking. Want to see a lot more people out there tomorrow at 12:30. But they were saying people are coming down there continually, giving them support. So wonderful job. Thank you all. And again, folks, if we ever get people caring about what's happening, if we ever force the issue, we're going to turn the entire tide. We are already getting fluoride taken out of hundreds of towns, dozens and dozens of major cities in the U.S. alone. It's happening. It's happening. And lawsuits are being filed. You name it. We are taking action. Briefly, speaking of fluoride, we developed the nascent iodine with 5 other things like Shilajit and other stuff that is known to draw fluoride, heavy metals, out of the body and to block radioactive isotopes going into the glands. And that's what the fluoride shield in the double the size bottle than the survival shield is at InfoWarsLife.com. We will sell out today of the nascent iodine survival shield that we have, but more comes in a few weeks. You can still order it, and then it'll ship out as soon as it comes in. But if you want the survival shield or the fluoride shield, that's also how we fund a lot of our operation here while helping folks. It's a win-win. InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139 and check out our Patriot Blend Mexican coffee. At the start of the next segment, to get into the 5-fold radiation increase being picked up and confirmed by California health departments. That is coming up at the start of the next segment. When he leaves us at about 40 after or so, I will then get into the Obamacare news, the smartphone news, that it's been proven in studies to be interrupting your sleep. And I'm going to explain how it's doing that. Not just the texting or the messages coming in, buzzing and waking you up. I noticed this years ago, and so put the phone out of the room or turned it off. But it's also when the towers are checking with it, pinging, it's sending in microwave radiation enough to actually stimulate the brain and to disrupt your sleep patterns. That's what wireless is doing as well. And we're just hammered by it at every level. So we're going to be looking into that and the record cold temperatures all across the United States. This story I've mentioned, but I want to get into this now. MSNBC pundit calls on Obama to govern by decree. They're already governing by decree with banker bailouts and wars and carbon taxes and all the rest of it. Academic who compared Eric Holder to Moses demands a raft of executive orders. MSNBC pundit Michael Eric Dyson has called on Obama to dispense with the obstructionist Congress and instead pursue his agenda via an aggressive raft of executive orders. Well, you can't do that. But he is already doing that. So remember Obama 5 years ago would say, now I got to follow the law. I can't do whatever I want. And then, boy, I wish I didn't have to. I'll do whatever I have to. And if they can set the precedent, Obama will leave office probably. But the precedent will be set to be able to have presidents basically be dictators. And that's what's being done here. So here is a clip of that.
This president has the bully pulpit. He has the will of the American people, so many of us who stand behind him. Yeah. And I think that he's got to trudge forward. Now, it's true that this do-nothing obstructionist Congress, on the one hand, can tie his hand, but there are enough executive orders he can achieve on one hand, and also getting out there rallying the troops, so to speak, using the brilliant oratorical skills he has to be able to enliven, edify, and encourage American citizens to go to the polls.
Rally the idiot supporters who went and tried to sign up in the exchanges, and it's so expensive that well, number one, you can't even sign up most of the time, but if you can, it's double, triple, quadruple, or 5 times the cost in some cases. Rally the idiot troops who've already been absolutely bamboozled. And again, I'm not saying John McCain would have been good, or even Mitt Romney. The point is that the selected one that the establishment wanted was Obama, the media, the big banks, the mega elite, because he could push the bull more, create more division, bamboozle his supporters better, while he does every horrible thing that you could ever imagine across the board. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. And, you know, they just want you to go pay the fee, pay the $5,000 a year. It's even more for a family. That's why they don't even let you sign up. They're just going to take it out of your bank account anyways. All this law really did was act as a smokescreen for insurance companies to force you to buy their product and be able to collude to charge you whatever they want. But obviously, you've got to opt out of it because it's nothing but a data mining scam. There's an article up on Infowars.com. Drudge, I've opted out of Obamacare for life. Newshound says he would rather pay the tax than get government-mandated health insurance. Well, I've experienced that when you actually get the insurance, then you're charged more and put at the back of the bus because you're known as a moron. I mean, that's how this whole system works. It is a tax ruled by the Supreme Court, transferred to the predominantly offshore mafia banks. And you're like, man, that's bold. Well, of course it's bold. You got a zombie population that can't find their rear end with both hands. So get ready. This is only the beginning. They're going to shut everything down. Dr. Christopher Busby's with us for about 30 minutes. Then I'm going to get into the geopolitical news, the latest Obamacare news, the huge NSA developments. Also, voluntary government checkpoints spark backlash. That's in USA Today. These are federal grants going on for at least the last 5 years. In L.A., they use on-duty police and make you give it. And they're phasing in domestic checkpoints. That's all this is. And finally, the government insists they're voluntary. They're creating a backlash because of the presence of uniformed police officers. They direct you off the road with flashing lights. That's a custodial arrest. That is official oppression. When they do it in a group, it's got a name: racketeering, organized crime. You're like, but it's the government. That's the most dangerous type historically of organized crime. Special interest, corporate interest, controlling government. That's what's happening here. Literally dog training the public to put up with anything. Now, joining us is Dr. Christopher Busby. He's a chemical physicist and British scientist who's advised the Parliament and the EU, LLRC.org. And he heads up the low-level radiation campaign. And everything that he has talked about has been coming true, unfortunately, and unfolding. And Dr. Busby joins us now from England to break down the new developments that are coming out with the health department out in San Francisco confirming a 500% increase in background radiation levels, which isn't that high, but it's still alarming, showing it could go up, but saying they don't know where it's coming from when they could test for the isotopes. Only Infowars.com, one local San Francisco paper, DrudgeReport.com, and RT are covering this. The starfish are almost all dying. They've confirmed cover-ups in radiation in the fish. That's been in the news. So this is a big deal. And the good news is it's getting people's attention on this subject. So Dr. Busby joins us, and of course they predicted in major computer models from universities in Spain and other places that the main radiation waves would start hitting in January of this year from the ocean, and indeed that corresponds with this increase. So Dr. Busby, you've got the floor to give us your report and tell us what you think is really going on here. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Alex, I'm pleased to be here again. I'm a bit confused myself about what's going on, I have to say. The point is that the amount of radioactivity, if you do the calculations, the amount of radioactivity that's gone into the sea, by the time it's diluted and come across to America, would not be able to, on the basis of theory anyway, cause the kinds of increases in radioactivity that are being reported. Now, I had a look at. I've been following measurements made by the U.S. RadNet system, which is an excellent system, so long as it works, and it usually does, where you can see levels of radioactivity or radiation of different energies plotted out from a number of different stations throughout the United States. And of course, at the same time, since Fukushima, we've had a huge number of people actually buy Geiger counters and put themselves on networks where they report the measurements that they've been taking. And I've followed with great interest this extraordinarily useful development. But by and large, what they've been measuring has been radon in rainwater. And so people, over the last year or so have been getting terribly excited because suddenly they get 5 times background, or even sometimes 10, 15, 20 times background by measuring rainwater. And I've then asked them to measure the rate at which the radioactivity decays in the rainwater samples, and usually it's very rapid, which suggests that it is radon, natural radon. But having said that, the levels of natural radon seem to be increasing, and I'm a bit puzzled about that too. Now, as far as the Fukushima radiation coming to the United States, this report from LA and from San Diego, talking about a 5-fold excess, I followed this up and had a look at the weather patterns for those areas and looked at the RadNet measurements, which are on the internet, and where you can see these levels of gamma radiation plotted. And in fact, they plot very much on the top of fog banks. So if you look at fog banks, which of course fog banks occur a lot in California, and as the fog floats in, so the radiation levels go up. Now, I think that the radiation levels would go up anyway as the fog comes in, because there's more material there to cause gamma radiation from quite natural sources. But I'm not saying that's it. So I mean, having said all this stuff, I know it sounds a bit waffly, but I mean, I would like to wait and see somebody actually measure the gamma radiation spectrum of whatever it is that's supposed to be coming in and causing the irradiation of America, because it's very hard to imagine how there could be a 5-fold increase in natural background radiation from the sort of material that's coming from Fukushima. It's just too far away. But having said that, and having also done the calculations about the concentrations that would likely to be in the ocean, what I have noticed, and this is actually terrifying, is that since Fukushima, there has been an increasing collapse in the entire Pacific ecosystem. And this is not something which one can just kind of poo-poo or write off.
That's what I was going to raise. We have mainline Oceanic University studies as high as 98% death, starfish, fish. They've never before seen whales that are Siamese twins or conjoined. That's on Infowars.com, coming up on the West Coast. The fishermen are reporting all sorts of deformities. They're posting these online. And then I want to get into the fact they're using homeless people to move the rods in Japan, and where all this is going, because they're now picking up higher levels of radiation in Missouri and in the snow. And then it seems like the entire breakdown of the nuclear power system, because as you know, they're now 35, 40 years old. Suddenly they're saying they're leaking more. So that's what I was saying yesterday. This could be other events as well, all building up on each other.
Well, let's begin with the Pacific, because to my mind, that is actually the most scarier thing of all of the scariest outcome of all of this, because I don't think that we can write off any of that. Now, all those other measurements of radioactivity in Missouri and in the snow and in the fog banks off LA and all the rest of it could in principle be just that more people are looking and more people are expecting things to happen, and so when they see something they go, oh my gosh, we're all going to die, it's Fukushima. That's a possible answer, and we won't know the answer to that until we do some gamma spectroscopy and find out what's going on. And of course the problem is nobody's doing it that we can believe.
That's my issue.
Sort of independent institute.
The health departments are saying it's 5 times, it's 10 times, we don't know why, don't worry about it, we don't know where it's coming from. But can't they test for the isotopes?
They can test. Absolutely, they can test. They could measure the gamma spectrum with a portable gamma spectrometer, and it would tell them immediately where it was coming from. Because if, as I assume is the case, that it's radon, is that they would see a big peak at 619 kilo-electron volts from bismuth 214. And so that would tell them immediately what it was. There would be no problem about it, okay? So I don't know why they aren't doing that. I don't know why someone hasn't done that. I mean, I had the same problem with somebody in Brazil who was finding enormously high levels of radioactivity in the water, and he was assuming it was coming on the jet stream from Fukushima, which is impossible because it's just too far. And it turned out the thing had a half-life. You know, he got some tissues and measured the half-life, put it in a plastic bag and so on. And it turned out to be quite a short half-life, so it was obviously radon. It couldn't have come from Fukushima, and I'm suspecting the same thing in the United States. But of course, like you say, there are loads of nuclear power stations there, and they could all be leaking all over the place, and it could be one of those. So it could be cesium-137, could be plutonium, could be any blooming thing. The trouble is there's no independent organization with the competence or the financial clout or the machinery over there, and it should be a global independent organization that people can believe, who immediately swoop in and check out these sorts of reports, you know, apart from anything else, so that people don't freak out. But as far as the Pacific is concerned, I think that is real. We've got a population collapse all across the Pacific. And my colleague Alexei Yablokov, who is a population biologist, I was with him in Moscow recently talking about this issue. And the problem is that that you can tip an entire ecological system over the edge. So in other words, it's if you get to a sort of 11% death of this lot and 11% death of that lot and 11% death of something else and so on, and they all depend upon each other, the whole thing goes down the toilet. And I think that's what's happening in the Pacific. And it's absolutely terrifying because so many people depend upon the Pacific for their food supply.
Well, you're absolutely right, Dr. Busby, and we've got some of the studies up on screen now, but I'm reading marine biologists here saying they've never seen such deformities in fish and in marine mammals that they're seeing now. I mean, we're talking about Siamese baby whales now washing up.
Okay.
I mean, that sounds like radiation.
What I think about that. I've thought quite hard about this because the way in which I've approached this is to actually, take the number of pettabecquerels or terabecquerels and divide it into the water, which is really the kind of way the nuclear industry operate. It's a sort of primitive approach. And if you do that, what it shows is that the actual quantity, the total quantity from Fukushima is actually less than the total quantity from the nuclear weapons testing. And I said this before. But what is different is this, is that Fukushima is an awful lot of uranium. And in the last 10 years, a lot of and also plutonium, of course. And if that was converted as a result of the explosions into small particles, into these nanoparticles, and we know that that is the case because we've measured them in car filters and on people's shoes and so on. So we know that these nanoparticles exist. Now, if they came along into the Pacific Ocean and contaminated the basis of the sea life, the plankton, if you like, then we would then of course everything depends upon that, and then the particles would get into the larger animals and
it would bioaccumulate. And it would bioaccumulate, correct, Doctor?
Yes, of course, that's right. But they would bioaccumulate as particles, as hot particles, and this would really explain the collapse. It would also explain the genetic effects in the higher mammals, because we saw similar genetic effects in Fallujah from depleted uranium.
Absolutely. Stay there, Doctor. Break that down when we come back, because, folks, we're at the top of the food chain, too, just like the whale. And we can see for miles and miles the currents that come right at North America from Japan, the winds, the trade winds, the jet stream, all of it. And what he's saying here, I know most of you understand this, but I want this to really sink in, is that you've got all the hot particles, not just the background radiation. It's those hot particles that are making the general background ambient level be higher. But when you've got the particles itself, that'd be like if you had a lead detector and you were at a shooting range, you picked up higher levels of lead. If you actually, though, eat one of those lead bullets, you're going to get really sick. That's the hot particle. That's the analogy. And so you've got whales that are eating the fish, or if they're baleen, they're eating all the plankton, bioaccumulating like a sponge, like a filter, the radioactive particles that have been dumping in. And so they're literally being used as filters, and that's why they've tested the tuna and stuff, and they're radioactive. And so now you've got just stuff that marine biologists have never seen. Dr. Busby's with us till about 40 after, then I'm going to cover a bunch of big, important breaking news. But Dr. Busby, continuing, you got cut off by the break. Is that what you're getting at here, is why we're seeing a Pacific level collapse, the starfish disintegrating, the fish dying, the seals dying? I mean, it's undoubted across the board. Something big's going on. And if we're similar to those animals and we're eating stuff out of the ocean, what is it going to do to us bioaccumulating?
I put a picture up on my Facebook site recently, and it's sort of gone viral. But it's a picture that was taken in the 80s of a hot particle with tracks in an edible mussel. And you can see that picture on my Facebook site. Various other people have published it all over the place now. It's truly terrifying because it's, if you like, a photograph of what a hot particle does and how you see it.
Give us your official Facebook name so we can put it on screen.
It's just Chris Busby. It's just Chris Busby.
Fantastic. We'll put it up on screen. Go ahead.
Anyway, yeah. So I mean, I don't know if this is the answer, Alex, but the point is something is happening there. There's no doubt about it. The very important paper, the one that really did it for me, is by K.R. Smith. And various people who are oceanographers, and they were concerned about global warming. And what they've been doing is they've been measuring the amount of dead creatures that reach the seabed. So in other words, they can take a certain period of time and they can measure the mass of dead things that die on the surface of the ocean and then float down and hit the bottom. And what they noticed, and they do this graph of various different parts of the Northeast Pacific, And you can see that after Fukushima, the amount of dead creatures that reached the sea bottom suddenly accelerated up to an enormously high level in all of the places that they were measuring. And they say, oh, there must be some problem with global warming and that it's cutting in and this and that. But it's obviously not global warming because nothing has happened with that sort of trend in global warming, but certainly something has happened with that sort of trend from Fukushima. And I think it must be that the uranium because most of the stuff coming out, although a lot of the radioactivity is not uranium, in terms of actual mass, vast amounts of uranium come out of nuclear sites. And so I think a lot of this stuff's coming out in the form of nanoparticles, spreading into the ocean and then being carried by the plankton. It's getting into some of these microorganisms in the ocean and then going up the food chain in that way. And in that way, probably it will drift across and end up on the California coast. In which case, what you need to do is to watch out for inhaling the air within about 1 kilometer of the coast. People in coastal communities are going to increase their level of risk from cancer and various other diseases, if that's the case. But the trouble is nobody's measuring it. Nobody's measuring this stuff. And there is no independent global institute or organization that is funded to do this or can do it because there's no money to do it, And of course, you've got all these well-meaning people wandering about with Geiger counters, but that really is no help. We need to know where this stuff is and we need to characterize it properly. And nobody's doing that. That's the problem. But what certainly we can see is the effects of something. We can certainly see the collapse of the Pacific biota, the collapse of the Pacific ecosystem. And that is truly terrifying.
It certainly is. And again, my issue, and we talked about this before, I want to come back in one more segment and talk about other issues that are important and how you think we protect ourselves. But government's not even saying they're investigating. And, oh, who knows? It could be red eating utensils. I mean, that's an actual quote by one of the health department people. And then they act like you're weird to even care that the radiation level in some areas is 15 times what they call normal background. And they confirm what amateurs with Geiger counters are saying. And it's like bad to even care. It's incredible.
Well, I mean, as far as that's concerned, if you take me, I'm one of the few people that speaks about this stuff, and I just get attacked continuously from all over the place. There is no doubt in my mind that there is an operation taking place from within government or from people within government to cover up all of these things. So it's no surprise that...
Well, sure, look at Japan. Stay there. Let's talk about the cover-up and what it's done in Japan, because now that cover-up has collapsed. Dr. Chris Busby's our guest, llrc.org. Tragedy and hope. But when I say transcend the left-right paradigm, there are issues that the right promotes that make sense and are good. There's issues the so-called left promotes that make sense or good, some that are bad, on both sides. This isn't about being left or right. It's about surviving, having a world, not being insane. And so many cultures would just throw their garbage in the river. Well, you could do that when it was just regular garbage. Or the Romans would drink their wine out of lead-lined pots, and that's why they were so violent and insane. They studied Roman bones. And as soon as they started adopting the lead-lined pottery, they became more violent, more insane, more aggressive. And then it finally probably led to their collapse. And that's lead, ladies and gentlemen. The unleading of gasoline is directly correlated the last 30 years with massive decreases in crime. I mean, that's just a fact, along with other issues as well. Citizens becoming more armed. But the lead issue is big. That's how the left always counters me. Well, crime went down because lead being taken out. I'm like, yeah, I know. That's part of it. But this is GMO. I'm all for science. I'm all for a better crop, hybridization. That's not what this is. They'll put 14 different genes and a pesticide producing bacteria or fungus in it, and it kills the bees. Thousands of studies. I've interviewed top scientists that were making millions of dollars a year. And then they found out their potato or their corn was killing the lab animals. And they said, we can't put this out. I've had these scientists on. And then they'd be called aside by the corporate head saying, you like your $3 million a year, doctor? You like that big fancy house? There are too many people. I've talked to Russian scientists, British scientists, Pakistani scientists, U.S. scientists who get brought into the room. Monsanto doesn't eat their own GMO. That's Associated Press. That's CBC. The Chinese and other globalist elite have their own organic greenhouses. The elite drink purified water. They're moving to rural areas because, ladies and gentlemen, they've decided to just pollute everything, and they've gone crazy, and they're building more reactors as they melt down. People think, oh, it's a left-wing issue to care about radiation. No, it's looking at a Geiger counter and deformed whales and all the fish life dead. Okay? And so it isn't about left or right or about what issue you're for. It's about what issue is real. And they're covering up. My cousin died when he was very young, and they admitted it was from Agent Orange because his dad had been a helicopter pilot in Vietnam. My uncle died, and the doctors looked at his heart and stuff and said, no, there's Agent Orange scarring here. We see this in Vietnam vets that were in Agent Orange. I had a cousin and my uncle die because of Monsanto, okay? This is real, folks. This is real. Now, I'm going to shut up and go back to Dr. Busby, but I'm sitting here breathing increased radiation. I'm sitting here living in this toxic waste. GMO is everywhere. Allergies are off the charts, directly connected to all this stuff bombarding our immune systems. And the state won't even look at this. When Berkeley came out and said, we've got a huge increase in radiation in the water, they were told to shut up by the feds. I mean, this is insanity. And I think, Dr. Busby, we're not left, we're not right. We are for self-preservation and not insane. But I want you to finish your points on radiation, on other concerns, what's happening, and where you think this is going and what's happened in Japan. I'm going to try to shut up and let you talk, but you just heard me speak about the mindset of the elite. I've studied this in history. There are times when you get megalomaniacal elites who are so nihilistic they just don't care. So is it a depopulation agenda? Or is it that they just don't care and have gone insane? Because the laws of physics, you're a physicist, you know this, are going to catch up with us. Increased cancer rates, increased deformity, increased mental illness, increased lowering of IQ. I mean, the West is in a toxic stew. There's no doubt we're killing ourselves.
Right. Well, all of those things are true. And in fact, it's not a question of what's going to happen in the future because it's already happened. I mean, if you look at the cancer rates I've studied in real terms, in fact, that's where I came in 1995. I was looking at the cancer rates going back to 1960 or 1950. And the weapons testing that occurred in 59 to 63 caused a 30 to 40% increase in cancer 20 years later, and that was the famous cancer epidemic in real terms. But of course the governments came along and all their stooges came along and said, oh, it's just because we have an aging population, but that wasn't true. The age standardized rates went up. And what we're seeing now is continuation of the same scenario. But of course, ultimately, you cannot continue to boil the frog. Eventually, the frog dies. And I think what we're seeing in the Pacific now, which is the death of the Pacific ecosystem, is going to ultimately just be a mirror to the death of the human ecosystem. We have imposed our energy and our will and our toxic waste on the planet so long now that that's going to come back and bite us, and already is doing so. And the evidence is quite clear from all all that we hear from Japan, that it's already doing that even now, just a few years after Fukushima. And we know what happened in Belarus because we've studied Belarus. So we know that the population collapsed in Belarus. There was an increase in death rate in the old people. The average lifespan fell from something like 65 to something like 45 people. And of course, the birth rate collapsed as well. So if you've got no children being born and you've got older children dying, then that's the end of your population. That's an ecological population collapse. And that is what we're seeing. We're seeing people who cannot have babies now. So huge amounts of effort are now going into doing in vitro fertilization because normal methods of fertilization don't work anymore. And goodness knows what's going to be the status of the children that are born. Enough studies have been done to show that children who were born after the exposures of Chernobyl and the exposures from the weapons fallout had much smaller brains, much lower IQs, and of course in animals also too. So yeah, sure. But then the question is, who's doing this? Are they mad? And so all the rest of it. I mean, I'm inclined to the belief that there's not some kind of mad, monstrous cabal at the top of this, some kind of Mekon-like character, sort of who hates everybody and is totally insane, pulling the strings and causing the IAEA to cover things up and all these other things that we know happen. I think it's just an economic machine. That's what I think it is. I think we have built ourselves through economics and probably through a lot of people who want to get rich constructing these economic systems. We have constructed a monster. We have made a sort of Frankenstein that is now unstoppable. That's what I think is the problem. Because ultimately, all of these efforts to cover up radiation and to build more nuclear power stations and do all of these things ultimately are aimed at just enriching people with uranium shares and causing the military to become more powerful. And of course, it's built into the military to become more powerful. That's what they do. It's built into organizations that that are set up to make money. And once you put all of these systems together into a structure, you have created a monster, and that's the monster that we have. Ultimately, that monster will be taken down, together with all of the rest of us, unfortunately, unless we can manage to find somewhere to hide, by nature. And we're seeing the beginning of that now.
Well, I don't doubt that there's a carrying level for the planet and that there are overpopulation issues in certain areas. My concern is the rigged economy, because I've read the Royal Commission on Population. I've seen what they've said. They've blocked all the new developments because old bureaucracies wanted to stay in control, and they've done everything they can to shut down any real competition in developing cleaner systems and turned any new development into just a scam boondoggle where nothing even gets developed. And then meanwhile, the genetic engineering, all of it, the elite use the environmental movement as a power grab and as a way to tax people instead of actually trying to clean stuff up. It's just insanity. It's like no matter what you do, somebody's going to cheat inside the system. It's so rigged, as Rolling Stone reported on the banks, that the people, Max Kaiser calls it suicide bankers, where there were people in the World Trade Center that even after one tower had collapsed, they stayed in the other one because they could sit there making trades, making millions of dollars a minute, even though they were going to die. And that is the definition of insanity.
Well, they got what they deserved, yeah, that's sure. But anyway, you know, after the Second World War, there were a whole load of philosophers and psychologists who tried to figure out how on earth the Second World War happened and all those terrible things happened in Nazi Germany and so on. And they basically figured out that any human beings could do anything, given the right sort of culture surrounding them and supporting their idiocies and insanities. They would form a sort of group of insane people who would then run amok and insanely continue to do what they were doing, even if it was killing themselves. And that's
that was the Milgram and Stanford experiments where they found, 90+% of people who were nice, good folks with no criminal background, when ordered by an authority figure to murder, would do it.
Yes, that's right. All those electric shock people. I know. Well, anyway, we kind of know all this, but the problem is, we're in this awful position of knowing it all and watching it all collapse and not being able to do anything about it. Anyway, we are trying to do something about it, but the problem is within the current political system doesn't seem to be possible. Because they control the media and they control well, apart from you and a few people like that, mostly, you have these CNN type people who will just, they have, what do they call it now? They call the Science Media Center. I came across this recently. There's this woman called Fiona Fox who runs a thing called the Science Media Center. And basically what they do is they bully journalists into telling lies on the basis that they are the people who know about the science, and people who are independent scientists like me just get told that they shouldn't talk to us, that we're insane. So that they have an actual media machine, which is like, if you like, the opposite of you. But they have a lot more money than you do. That's the problem.
Well, look at how no newspapers in California would report the increased radiation levels until local journalists, just citizens with a website and a YouTube account, went out. Others joined them, found the same thing. And the health department had to go out and say, okay, it is 5-10 times higher, but that's not a problem. And we're not going to look into why that's happening. I mean, that is the definition of insanity. In closing, Dr. Busby, looking at Japan, we always remember the official story the first month almost 3 years ago, but now it's admitted there was a cover-up. It's admitted that there's a cover-up of deaths and cancers and mutations in plants and animals. And now the mafia is running the cleanup, and it's just sinking into the ocean. What is your gut what does your gut tell you is going to happen as they try to clean up the site?
I don't think they can clean up the site, Alex. I think that they're going to have to throw a fence around that and just watch it forever. I mean, I don't see what else they can do. I did think of and they did think about the possibility of bombing it into the ocean. But frankly, I think there's nothing much they can do now. The genie's out of the bottle. The material in those reactors is now in the ground somewhere, and there's no way that they can get at it. And the more water they pump in there, and the continuous water that comes down into the groundwater there, will just wash the uranium out into the sea and continue to pollute the Pacific Ocean more or less forever.
What about building a giant seawall They could pump the water out as they build dams and build. I mean, this is a big project. They should build like a Hoover Dam around it.
Well, that's a possibility, but then they'd have to get under it. That's really the problem, because, you know, the hydraulic pressure from the water that went in there would just dilute the uranium and the other material. A lot of it's soluble, and then it would go underneath.
So you think it's more dangerous for them to have homeless people? I saw photos of these folks, obvious, complete alcoholics. I'm not knocking them, but, you know, homeless old men is who they have removing the rods, and they're using duct tape to try to seal leaks. I mean, is it more dangerous to have those rods touch?
Well, if you touch the rods, you're dead. I mean, there's no two ways about it. I mean, the radiation fields in the 1 meter away from those fuel rods is lethal. I mean, that's what the Chernobyl people found. Those people will die if they get anywhere near those rods. There's no way that they can get near those rods.
I mean, but what's the current plan right now? They've got armies of homeless people crawling around in there. That sounds like an insane idea.
It's all an insane idea, but the problem is that what else is there? I don't know quite what else there is. I mean, I'm at a loss. I just throw up my hands and say, you know, all I can say is you shouldn't have done it in the first place. You know, and that's the problem with nuclear right from the very beginning. That although it might be a very low probability risk, it's an extremely high impact risk. And now we've got all these nuclear power stations all over the world, certainly an awful lot in America, where exactly the same thing could happen.
Well, sure, and even Congress people, even congressional hearings admit that if we were to have a EMP or an electrical power grid go out, even for a few weeks, they'd run out of diesel power. We'd have meltdown Chernobyls all over the world. This is insane.
That's right. Well, if you have a big electromagnetic pulse like the one that is possible, that one, then of course you knock out your generators as well. Then you really have got catastrophe.
All right. Well, llrc.org. Dr. Busby, thank you so much for what you're doing for all of us, and thank you for spending time with us today.
Okay, you're welcome. See you soon.
All right, folks, thank you. All we're trying to do here is to draw attention to what's going on. That's all I'm trying to do. I don't have all the answers here. When we send our reporters out there this week to go from Southern California through San Francisco all the way up to Seattle, we're going to do this a little bit different. We're going to start in San Francisco, go up to Seattle, fly back down and check far Southern California from the border right up to Los Angeles. So they're going to be there a full week, 4 of my crew members. And we can only do all of this because of your support. When you buy the T-shirts, the books, the videos, the high-quality organic, shade-grown, and volcanic soil, Wake Up America coffee, my favorite type of coffee. So we've brought it to you right here, roasted in Colorado, shipped out worldwide from Austin, Texas, the Wake Up America coffee, the Made-in-1776.com brand of George Washington belt buckles and limited edition clothing, the ThyroSafe. We sell the government-recommended stuff as well, but you can't take that long-term. That's for in the middle of a major disaster. And, of course, we have the Survival Shield from InfoWarsLife.com that is the proprietary Nascent iodine. It's blue-purple when it's on paper. No other iodine does that. It's red or black because it's not really Nascent iodine. It's bound iodine, oxidized iodine. This is real Nascent iodine. National Academy of Sciences certified. Whole 9 yards. This is the only one that does it. I've discovered this with doctors and scientists who had known about it for over a decade and said, my goodness, I want to bring this to the public. We do it with InfoWars Life Survival Shield, which is almost sold out, but we get more in the next week to 2 weeks. I'm told some shipped out today from the manufacturing laboratory. But the point is, InfoWarsLife.com, the fluoride shield is a 2-ounce bottle, not a 1-ounce bottle, and it's only $10 more. It has the Nascent iodine and 5 other key compounds that pull out the fluoride and other toxic members of the halogen family and heavy metals, you name it. Go watch the informational videos and read about it at InfoWarsLife.com or call toll-free 888-253-3139. I did deep research because of the increasing radiation levels and talked to all these medical doctors, nutritionists, scientists, you name it, and came upon you need to take non-iodine during emergencies. You need to take it all the time. And that the very best was what we got a hold of and have brought to you via InfoWarsLife.com. So this is what I take. It's what my wife takes, what my children takes. Consult your physician before you take it. But it's in a regular dose amount that's recommended there. InfoWarsLife.com or 888-253-3139. And you can also call that number if you want to write to us by mail. They can give you the P.O. Box number as well. But InfoWars Survival Shield and InfoWars Fluoride Shield at InfoWarsLife.com. I'll continue with news towards the end, but here's some of the other news that we have. This just broke at InfoWars.com. Kit Daniels did this story. Report, teacher tells student Jesus is not allowed in the school. You can't have a cross. You can't talk about Jesus. Now, folks, that violates your First Amendment. The school, if it's public, cannot have an official religion. That's the First Amendment. It's the right of religion and that the government has no jurisdiction. But this is what they're doing by design. It's not an ignorant teacher doing this. This is authoritarianism. Teacher trashes a messages first grader brought to class referring to Christ, says nonprofit group. A school teacher told a first grader that Jesus is not allowed in the school while tearing off messages reciting a religious legend that the student attached to candy canes he brought for his class, as nonprofit group reports. And this is just standard, folks. They throw Bibles in the trash can if you bring them to many schools. And again, the child could bring anything they wanted, Pokemon cards, Satanism stuff. Here's, of course, that'd be fine, of course. You know, all the Harry Potter stuff and all that, that's religious. New York City group applies to build Satan statue at Oklahoma State Capitol, and it has two children lovingly standing beside Baphomet. So there you go in that stunt. I guess he wants to rape him or kill him because that's what Satan does. It's all about his own personal power and doing whatever old Satan wants. Whether you believe in Satan or not, the globalists have basically manifested this thing themselves. Again, there is a lot of heat getting generated in all 50 states by illegal checkpoints on the highway where the police direct you into an area with flashing lights and cones and then intimidate you into giving blood, saliva, tissue. Looks like Barack Obama is there lovingly by his father. That little kid looks like Barack Obama. I think they should put that at the White House to be more accurate about what they really do. They should put that out in front of all the Planned Parenthoods and say, come on in, kill a baby for me. Of course, those women don't, I mean, I guess Satan give them power for doing that. Continuing here, California legislators introduced bill to banish the NSA. That's all just on the surface. They're involved in every criminal activity you can imagine. And then how the NSA almost killed the internet, Wired Magazine. I told you that in the last 20 years, they paid off telecoms to put in NSA hubs. And the telecoms get paid to do that. And Microsoft and Google and all the rest of them. Amazon's involved. That's all come out. But then there was an attempted takeover in cybersecurity of even their systems. And so you had it's kind of like the CIA and NSA fight or the Pentagon and the CIA fight over turf. Well, the private corporate folks who helped engineer all this, they had a fight with the government over who runs all this, and they won. And the media billed them with the big inside story about how, cybersecurity didn't get passed. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and other tech titans had to fight for their lives against their own government. Their own government. It is their government. They created it, the criminal government. An exclusive look inside their year from hell and why the internet will never be the same. And they say, yeah, they didn't get fully taken over, but they kind of did. That's right. Isn't that just sweet? And the trendies are telling you the government's the threat. Folks, these big corporations are the government. So, again, that's how they spin this whole thing. So that's the news behind the news. The rest of the story, as they say. We've got a bunch of Obamacare news coming up. Also, what smartphones do inside your bedroom, Bloomberg's reporting on. And EPA's coming to ban your fireplace. So get ready. The third hour is coming up. Infowars.com. Got the video up on Infowars.com with all these MSNBC hosts saying Obama should act as a dictator. There's video of this. You guys gave me a great video list. I can't find it. I'm not even sure if we have it, but I saw the video this morning. Al Sharpton literally donned a white lab coat like he's a doctor, and he says these right-wingers are boiling over with denial. We do have it. I'm going to play that in a moment. About global warming. It's real, folks, and that's what's causing the record cold temperatures. Who's that top astrophysicist with the big weather center in England I've had on so many times over the years? who was on back in the summer and predicted a record cold winter because the sun was going into a dormant phase. What's his name? I brought his card back from Bilderberg because I was there covering it and he was there. It doesn't matter. He looks like the mad scientist. And I mean, that guy comes on like a year before, 6 months before, and it's just exactly what he says happens. Because he's an astrophysicist and a meteorologist. And I can't believe I've got to explain to Al Sharpton, of course he knows, and Al Gore, of course, who knows, that it's the sun is the main driver. Yeah, Piers Corbin, that's his name. Piers Corbin. Not Piers Morgan, Piers Corbin. Yeah, let's pull his side up and show folks. But he predicted record cold because the sun was going into a dormant phase, was cooling off, was not putting off as much heat. Now, I'm not a meteorologist or an astrophysicist like him, but we stand next to the sun's fire, to quote Jimi Hendrix. And we would be absolute zero weather action. That's the site. We would be at absolute zero if it wasn't, it's time to get him back on next week, if it wasn't for the sun. Now, the UN voted 5 years ago and said the sun has no effect on climate. Ladies and gentlemen, that is like saying in freezing cold weather, standing next to a fire has no effect on whether you're hot or cold. Or like if you jump in a fire, it won't set you on fire. The sun goes through cycles, and it's going into a cooling cycle. So the ice caps of Mars, that I assure you your SUVs aren't hurting, they're now getting bigger again. Our ice caps are getting bigger. Now, again, radiation being released, GMO, toxic waste, that's a real issue. I'm at the top of the food chain just like you are as a mammal, as a Homo sapiens sapien. I want a clean environment. The fake environmental movement is about a power grab. I'm not worried about a farmer's wood stove that the EPA wants to ban. I'm worried about nuclear reactors leaking. I'm worried about the Chinese having back codes, Chinese government, into our computers and into our weapon systems. Let's go to the Al Sharpton clip. And then we'll
Someone
come back.
going around for the first time with a Geiger counter is likely to discover these great variations in levels from time to time.
UC Berkeley professor Edward Morse says
they called it unusually thick ice. Well, I think it's because they're unusually thick people who have not been paying attention to the actual science on global warming for the past 18 years and still think that we're all about to roast like a chestnut on open fire.
These right-wingers are boiling over with denial. Just because it snows in winter doesn't mean the planet isn't getting warmer. Remember, a UN panel said there's a 90% probability that humans are the primary cause of global warming. And over 97% of climate researchers surveyed in the United States Academy of Science agrees. It sure doesn't take much for the folks at Fox to hit their melting point. The results of tonight's experiments are in. And we've deduced the right wing could use a new talking point.
Turned out almost none of those scientists ever signed on to that report. They just agreed to be part of the panel. That's all a lie. That's been discredited for 4 years. Now it's not global warming, it's climate change. Well, the climate's always changing. Hey, Sharpton, why don't you talk about the radiation levels going up? No, because Al Gore doesn't have a radiation trading market, and neither does Barack Obama. So now they've gone from global freezing in the 60s and 70s as being the reason for a global government with the UN regulating all human activity. To the 90s, it's global warming because the sun had heated up and that we were all going to die if we didn't have a global VAT and global carbon tax, to now moving to just change, period. There's a tornado, there's a hurricane, there's a typhoon. They've always had those. Doesn't matter if we're at a 60-year low of tornadoes. They have MSNBC say we have all-time high tornadoes. Even though NOAA, they can't get the entire government to lie, came out last year and said we're at a 60-year low for tornadoes. Just type in NOAA, 60-year low for tornadoes, and you'll get their own website. But you turn on MSNBC or Al Jazeera with Al Gore, his channel with Al Jazeera, and it is we're all dead if we don't do whatever they say politically. and that's live in tiny houses and pay exorbitant taxes to them and ban wood stoves and ban factories and ban clean-burning coal. But, oh, have all the nuclear reactors leaking you want. That's fine. And I was just in the coffee room again, drinking out of my Gouling's Lodge, Monument Valley. This is John Wayne's favorite little shack hotel, literally. That's where he stayed like 10 times shooting movies out there. So beautiful in Monument Valley, Utah. The point is I was back there getting a cup of our coffee, Wake of America blend from southern Mexico. And I was watching CNN, and they had the meteorologist on there saying that this is a 20-year fluke event and that global warming is still real. Even though overall world temperatures have been going down in the last 5 years and have been constant before that for 16 years. I mean, we know the numbers, ladies and gentlemen. They get on television and tell people that polar bears can't swim, that penguins can't swim. I've shown you student class projects that I saw in a pizza place where they had the wall covered with them in Corpus Christi a few years ago. I shot video of this, where it showed all the penguins and polar bears drowning because there was no more ice. And it showed dozens of these from the school project showing the polar bears and penguins dying, done by 5th graders, traumatizing their mind in government curricula that the North and South Pole were going to melt and that all the animals would die. Unless you pay Al Gore and the UN money. So here are the facts. The sun is what drives our main climate, unless it's an undersea volcanic vent. And then they found microorganisms that do live from the heat of the water. But everything else, one way or another, is driven off the sun. I don't care if you're 5,000 feet under and you are a glow-in-the-dark fish like a lanternfish. The cycle of food that you end up eating begins on the surface in the first 100 feet of the water that causes the life cycle in the ocean. Just like they say, the only toxic waste we need to control basically is carbon dioxide, oxygen, sunlight, and water. You need those 4 things. Well, people aren't scared of water. People aren't scared of sunlight. They know oxygen is good. So carbon dioxide, we've gone out in Austin and gotten 9 out of 10 people to sign a form, including one guy that claimed he was a chemical engineer, to ban dihydrogen monoxide, which is water, because the scary name, and sodium chloride, which is salt, because it sounds scary. And this is how they use ignorance in the public to enslave us as a power grab, while ignoring all the real environmental problems. Chicago extreme cold, the worst ever recorded, lowest temperature ever recorded in Chicago. Icy weather threatens oil output from Texas and North Dakota because it's so cold. Cold weather causes surge in demand for Texas electricity grid. Fort Worth Star Telegram, because of a third of our power plants, including a new one in South Texas, in Corpus Christi, that they did not allow to open. A $3 billion clean-burning coal power plant that they didn't let open. Took them years to build. Obama shut it down. General Electric is exempt. They've got dirty burning plants. They get to make bigger profits. But it's still not enough for demand. Just like in Ceausescu's Romania, they had enough power for the public, but he decided the public didn't need electricity, except for his government facilities and his factories, as an act of control, as an act of siege, as a Cloward and Piven act of domination. So we told you that was coming years ago. The White House responded 3 years ago to our report about Obama saying he would bankrupt coal, and they came out and said we were insane. Climate change groups seek new leadership as green movement loses momentum. Doesn't matter, though. They still put the carbon taxes in. As the MSNBC host called for Obama to act as a dictator yesterday. But again, Al Sharpton says that the right-wingers are boiling over with denial about global warming. Continuing, EPA moves to regulate new wood stoves. Told you that was coming, folks. They already did it in Europe. We know exactly what they're going to do. Scientists reject claims of cold being caused by global warming. Time magazine blamed polar vortex on global warming in 1974 special report. That's global cooling. That's out of climate depot. So first it's global cooling, then global warming. So it just continues. Meteorologist tells Hannity the ghost of global warming is closing coal plants. That's right. Indianapolis mayor, if you're outside for 10 minutes, you could be dead without proper clothes, as if we need the government to tell us to put our clothes on. I thought mommy did that. Cold weather causes surge in demand, not just here, but all over the country, like in Chattanooga region. And again, less power plants, they can't supply it. So that's just some of the news. Travelers spend night on 3 snowbound Amtrak trains. Coldest air in 20 years, aimed at nation's heartland. Below zero in many areas. It just goes on and on. But the con artist doubled down. The Al Sharptons, the Al Gores, they double down and say, no, this is the proof. Pay us carbon taxes. Well, even if you believe carbon dioxide is deadly poison and killing everyone, even though plants breathe it and then put out or use it for photosynthesis and then put out oxygen, if China builds 3 new ones a week and we shut down more than 3 a week, if Mexico just builds literally hundreds of them on their border to supply the Southwest totally dirty and putting out all this toxic waste, and we have clean ones being shut down, and the Earth is one planet, if carbon dioxide is so evil, then why isn't it being shut down there? Because the globalists control us and they control those countries. That's what globalism is moving industry to areas you control to then leverage out the economies of the West to then prepare us for economic collapse, and then we can be socially re-educated into the collectivist model. And don't worry, once the full collectivist communism is in place with the fascist above it, offshore above the law, with diplomatic and corporate immunity, true feudalism, true North Korean hereditary dictatorships, once that happens, there's going to be nobody on welfare, folks. They're going to be at gunpoint digging ditches and working, in basically slave factories. Once they break us fully, it's going to be Soviet-style jackbooting. So all you people that have loved the ride so far, you're going to lose all of it. And those of us that are skilled workers, you're going to be total slaves under this. Now, William F. Jasper joins us for the balance of the hour, and he is the editor of the New American Magazine, newamerican.com. And they're at the tip of the spear exposing what's really happening with corporate global government being established. But we've only got a few minutes before we go to break, Mr. Jasper. Can you give us the definition of this global government? What political system would you call it? I call it neo-feudalistic serfdom or fascism with a scientific control technocracy. What would you call it, and what would you sum it up in 2 minutes as?
Well, that's probably as good a definition as any, Alex. What we are going to see is a kakistocracy, a rule by the worst, an aristocracy, the wealthiest, most powerful, controlling all aspects of our lives, social, political, economic, spiritual, moral, dictating where we shall live, if we shall live, where we shall work, if we will work. We are going to see total power, and total power creates total corruption. And so whether one defines it as communism, socialism, fascism, or a combination of those, it will be an oligarchic elite. And we're already moving in that direction. And what you just talked about with the global warming is a very good example of what we see this process in action and moving us toward a globalist elite. And I did a story on this a year ago when they had the big Doha conference on global warming, and the United Nations chief in charge of the UNFCCC, which is the global warming thing, Christiana Figueres, said that what we are after is a total transformation of the world, a total economic transformation, political transformation of the world. Well, we've been saying that and using various quotes of the leading advocates to show that this is what they're doing for years, but so seldom have they come out, the head of the organization, at one of their major conferences, confirming what
That's right. Stay there. We're going to come back and get into convergence, the latest breaking news, the real inside scoop on somebody that's been to scores of the meetings on what's being formed right now. And by the way, folks, this is the total transformation. Are you liking it? Are you liking being poor? Most of what they're saying is going to come true because they're not looking into a palantir or a crystal ball. They're reading the writings of these globalists. And used to, you had to get their minutes or get leather-bound books that were limited edition where they were bragging to each other. Now they're out in the open. And I think they're doing that because their agenda is in trouble. And it's behind. But it's still going through under its own massive inertia. This is a short 6-minute segment. An 18-minute segment's coming up. William F. Jasper, newamerican.com or thenewamerican.com. But in this short segment, I want to just talk about strategy with you. A, do you agree with me? Where are we geopolitically right now and just politically? A. B, you know, the more and more of the stuff they're doing, illegally spying, persecuting press, it's like we're too nice. And I've never been a radical calling for violence, and I'm not. But the historical proper response would be state grand juries, arrests, 1776, you know, trials. I mean, this is a global corporate espionage takeover. So how do you respond to them?
Well, this is what we're dealing with here. And yesterday we had the confirmation vote of Janet Yellen as chairman of the Federal Reserve, which is one of the biggest criminal operations in the history of the world. It just has transferred an untold number of trillions of dollars from American taxpayers and earners to Wall Street, to the politically connected banks. This is the largest case of robbery in the history of the world. So we're dealing with criminality on a global level and at a level that has never been seen here in America before. And so, yes, this is very serious. We will not have any freedom left. We will not have any economic security left to withstand the forces of globalism if we do not get enough people riled up now and educated to take the proper action. Congress has to hold these people accountable. And yesterday's vote, obviously, they did not. 56 to 26 voted for that. 11 members of the Senate, Republicans, crossed party lines and voted with the Obama Democrats to confirm her, basically saying that we're going to allow this criminality to run rampant continuously. And, we have to get enough people to realize that if we allow this to happen, we basically allowed the mafia, a mafia with Yale and Harvard and Georgetown law degrees and MBAs and PhDs to take over the economy. But it is a mafia on a much larger scale than the actual mafia.
Hollywood's done a great job the last 60 years convincing us that only Italian organized crime exists. And I've studied the history of it. They got a little too big for their britches. And so some of the older banking mobs and other mobs came in and basically took them to the woodshed. But even in the 40s and 50s, as you know, the head of the FBI would testify that there is no such thing as organized crime.
Absolutely. For a long time, Hoover said that this was all comic book stuff, that there was no such thing as an FBI. And it wasn't until the big Appalachia bust and Joseph Valachi coming forward that finally Americans had confirmation about the mafia. Well, we've been saying the same thing about a much more pernicious mafia, that is the secret and semi-secret organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bilderbergs. These are much higher level criminal operations than the mafia. Now, the mafia and the drug cartels and all organized crime operations attempt to create a front of respectability. And so you have, even amongst the various organized crime, mafia, Russian mafia, etc., you have folks that try to portray themselves as legitimate businessmen. Well, we have the same thing with the organizations, the Wall Street folks that are operating our Federal Reserve System and the worldwide banking system, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. But they start out at a much higher level. They already have all of the respectable backgrounds, the degrees, the major corporate backgrounds. And so it's going to take a Herculean effort on our part, and you're definitely doing your part to alert Americans to this, that, look, these folks are evil. They're criminals. And it doesn't matter that they may be CEOs of various companies and so-called respected Wall Street banks. They have taken trillions of dollars.
That's right. By every yardstick, they're the greatest criminals in history. And I'm going to give people some key information on the other side of this break. Stay with us. Corrupt combines, monopoly, fascist, socialist, communist, corporatist, as Mussolini called them, always operate from behind the scenes because what they're doing is a fraud. They always set up the same police states, the same spy networks, the same controlled economies. They always want to make the public poor so that they can control them with chicken feed, Cloward and Piven from the 60s that the Democrats adopted, public strategy to bankrupt America and put us all on welfare so they could socially engineer us. That's just one modern example of that people now know the definition of, so I talk about it. I talked about Cloward and Piven 15 years ago. Then Glenn Beck popularized it, so now people know what I'm talking about, so I've brought it back. But it's just one example. You read Roman Senate histories, which I've done, incredibly interesting. Or you read books written by Julius Caesar, or you read books written by British kings or by crown historians. It is jam-packed every page. It's not like reading science fiction or something where you read a whole book to read a battle. Every page is just chronicles of what was going on and how they paid off this group and how they manipulated that group and infighting inside this. The battle for humanity has always been about the individuals organizing together in like-minded groups against criminals, psychopaths, control freaks, organizing into their groups against us. And the globalists all know this. Carol Quigley and others in their books describe that once they get this new collectivist system, they're going to make it work this time because of science and technology. But all they're using that for now is to even game the system even more and insulate themselves from reality so that the crash will be that much worse. It's unsustainable. And so just as 60-something years ago, the media said there was no such thing as organized crime, it was a conspiracy theory in movies, the mafia had been operating, different mafias, for 100 years in this nation, different mafias. The mafia means our thing, or, the family, or La Cosa Nostra. But once they had to admit it was real, once it came out, then everyone was like, well, of course it was always real, and a lot of it could be, quote, tackled. And it's the same thing with the Federal Reserve. If you look at the Federal Reserve, folks, it's Bugsy Siegel, all those folks. It's all these big, powerful combines and elites. The Kennedys were involved. So many other groups. And, of course, Kennedy later was going to get rid of it. All the big Eastern establishment was involved in it. They met at Jekyll Island with J.P. Morgan and all of them in 1913. We know what happened. They even brag about it now today and have historians from the Fed basically admit what's happened. So here's the big news. The John Birch Society, New American Magazine, other liberty groups the last 60 years tirelessly exposed what was being set up. Barry Goldwater said the Trilateral Commission was set up to overtake the government with corporate interests and overthrow our republic. That's now happening. And so now they've gone from being able to deny it even existed. I remember hearing Rush Limbaugh in the 80s, late 80s, or maybe 1990 or so, when he first got on air, when I heard him in Austin say, there's no such thing as the CFR. Then later he said, oh, the CFR runs nothing. And that's because if you talk about it, you'd have your show removed. I was offered big national syndication deals, but I was told no Federal Reserve, no CFR, no black helicopters, no New World Order. Okay, so this is how this works. Mancal Muller, same deal. He said that on air. I mean, they literally tell you this. So now it's admitted it exists. They admit world government's being set up. There's no more denial about it. But still, sometimes they actually go back to the old propaganda and say it doesn't exist. But the point is, we've forced them to admit they exist, and that they're the authors of what's happening. Because, see, they don't want you to know they exist, so as things get bad, you know that they did it because they're going to pose as the saviors. We expose who's behind it. We expose who they are. We expose their agenda. We expose the plan they're setting up. Then they're never going to get away with it because as the fruits of their tyranny come in, they're going to get the blame. So exposure, it comes first. Now, I'm going to give you the floor for the next 12 minutes of this segment and then 6-minute segment after that. Editor of New American Magazine, but I wanted to just quote from history how key this exposure is that you and others have been part of, and that thanks to our forebears that did this, we now have a fighting chance to expose what they've been doing behind the curtain. William F. Jasper.
Well, Alex, there is so much to cover, and I jumped on the Federal Reserve just because less than 24 hours ago, that major keystone of this whole conspiracy was really put in the headlights for a moment. And we need to keep the spotlight on that because this is one of the eyes of the octopus rather than the tentacles. And as you pointed out, Jekyll Island, this was 100 years ago when we had the meeting, the secret meeting at Jekyll Island. Now, if you go to Jekyll Island today and you can take the tour, they will actually, the tour guide will explain that, yes, all these Wall Street representatives of J.P. Morgan and Rothschild and whatnot met here in secret. They all had assumed names. They came on secret trains. They didn't acknowledge each other because this was all a secret operation to bring this Federal Reserve into existence. They admit that at this the famous site at the hotel where this took place, and the Federal Reserve historians themselves now admit that. They say, well, this was necessary for the greater good in order to create this institution which was going to protect us from booms and bust cycles, etc. And of course, now we have a 100-year history to judge it on. And this past decade, this past 5 years to judge it on, where we've seen the greatest transfer of wealth. We shouldn't just call it transfer, we should call it robbery for what it is. When General Inspector of the Federal Reserve, Elizabeth Coleman, I believe her name is, testified in 2009, you may recall, I'm sure have run that testimony, that YouTube testimony. She was asked by Congressman, according to the Bloomberg account, there's as much as $9 trillion in loans off the books by the Federal Reserve. Where did that money go? And she says, well, we don't know about that. Question after question. Well, we are conducting a high-level review. It was complete blah, blah, yada, yada to the United States Congress, which is supposed to be supervising this. Congress created the Federal Reserve and basically gave them. Now, we've been pointing out for years, this is a very important point, is that this institution is very much a communist Marxist style institution. It's the plank number 4 of the Communist Manifesto, creating a central bank in the hands of the government, which will control the currency and credit. That's a communist feature. It's not a capitalist feature. True capitalism, if Wall Street people really are true capitalism, they believe in a free enterprise and people freely assuming, letting the market decide what the interest rates will be, how much capital will be available for loans, not having the government come in and dictate that. That command economy is thoroughly totalitarian, communistic. And so this is where we get into this whole issue of convergence. What we see is that for the past century, since the Federal Reserve was established, the insiders, the big Wall Street bankers, have been working hand in hand with communist and socialist movements throughout the world to centralize, cartelize, concentrate power. That's the main feature that you see in every totalitarian government, the concentration and centralization of power, breaking down of any checks and balances. And that's what has been happening here in this country. A very sophisticated campaign going on decade after decade, supervised by people in the various banking establishments, and particularly through organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations. Now it's expanded a whole plethora of various other groups from the Brookings Institution, the Aspen Institution, and various other groups, Trilateral Commission, to coordinate these activities. But you'll see in the Federal Reserve, the Treasury Department, the Department of State, Department of War, which became the Department of Defense, and all of the other major cabinet positions. You have Council on Foreign Relations, certified globalist folks running it through Republican and Democratic administrations. And so I just published an article on the New American just shortly before I came on the program here about the Yellen vote yesterday. Janet Yellen, member of the Council on Foreign Relations, made chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. Now the next person up for vote, he hasn't been officially put forward yet, but all the establishment is saying he's going to be the vice chairman, is Stanley Fischer, member of the Council on Foreign Relations for a long time. In fact, now he just stepped down as chairman of the Bank of Israel to come back to the United States in September, and was made a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And that was one of the first clues that he was going to be the next one.
And then Obama hired the new top economist last year, who was the Marxist head economist over in France. This is globalism, where people from Israel, France, you name it, are here openly running our country. Obama became the head of the UN Security Council a few years ago, violating Article 1, Section 9. It's the flaunting, and that's why I got you here today, and I know I digressed and other things as well. I want to talk about convergence, because we were talking about all these secret treaties being ratified right now, but we need to talk about convergence, how they then bring all this together, because that's so central. But it's also important to understand, in the 10 planks, they have an income tax and a private central bank to control the winners and losers. And people go, well, why are the ultra-rich for communism? They make us communists and have no rights as slaves and communalize our wealth. But then meanwhile, they're always exempt offshore, literally making us colonies. So globalists create communist structures as their plantation colonies to then extract the wealth. But again, number 5, central bank, centralized credit. And then they also have a income tax, public school. I mean, we are, for all intents and purposes, a communist quasi-fascist state. But let's get into convergence.
Well, in order to discuss that, because we could end up ranging far afield, and I might neglect it, I have to bring up, because I would like to, I'm sure you've brought it up many times, but in order to really understand convergence, which means the melding together of the so-called capitalist West with the communist East and the socialist middle ground of Europe. And this has been underway for a long time. And one of the first big revelations on this came out, and you can find it on the internet. I'm sure you have it on your website. We have it on our website. Norman Dodd was an investigator for the Congressional Committee investigation of the tax-exempt foundations. The Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, and other major foundations, Carnegie Corporation, had been, now these are foundations, tax-exempt foundations set up by the richest families in America. But a very curious thing was happening. These high-level, ultra-rich foundations, which were run by Council on Foreign Relations members, were constantly funding socialist, communist, Marxist, and subversive programs. And this pattern became so obvious that people were objecting to this and saying, how come these guys have tax exemption and they're funding all of these political programs, particularly ones that are subversive and that are anti-American. So Congress held a number of investigations, but during the recent investigations, Norman Dodd was their chief investigator, and he went and his investigators went to all the different foundations. But in one of his visits with the president of the Ford Foundation, Council on Foreign Relations member Rowan Gaither, he had this astounding revelation. This is one of those things like when Goldfinger tells James Bond, he comes out and just has to gloat and tells him what his plans are. We see it in the movies all the time. Well, this does happen in real life. It's happened to me on a couple of occasions. But in this particular case, Norman Dodd was told by Ron Gaither, would you like to know what kind of instructions we're operating under here? And he said, well, yes, I would. He says, we are operating under instructions to use our grant-making powers so to alter life in the United States that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Well, Mr. Gaither was astounded. Mr. Dodd was astounded because he knew that's exactly what it looked like they were doing, but he never thought he'd get an admission like that. And so he said, well, will you say that publicly to our committee? And he says, we would never dream of doing that. So this was just a gloat off the record, but it is confirmed by the actual facts. This is what these foundations have been doing for decades.
And by the way, I've had globalists as a so-called, talk show host. I can say whatever I want and give my punditry, but as a journalist, I have to, when somebody says this is off record, unless it's openly illegal, I have to keep that confidence, or they know that I then lose all my sources. But I've had globalist executives, you name it, many times reach out and say, man, just join us. The public's a bunch of scum. And I know you've been to all these UN meetings. I'm guessing that's where this happened to you. But they really try to recruit people that resist them.
Well, and I know several people who were actual disciples of mine that I trained who have joined them, have become members of the Council on Foreign Relations. They went to the mountaintop and saw the kingdoms of the world and decided to join up with them. So
that happened actually to Alan Greenspan. He knew Ron Paul. He wrote articles about the New World Order, the Federal Reserve, and they bought him off.
Absolutely. And so what we've seen for the last more than 50 years is an acceleration of this. And it wasn't quite so apparent during the so-called Cold War, because most of the Republican and Democrat operatives who were globalists maintained an anti-communist rhetoric. They kept warning that we have to build up all this defense against the Soviet Union and against China. Meanwhile, they were shoveling billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia, to China in foreign aid. Not just the money, but the technology and everything, which made them into world powers. But then with the so-called collapse of communism, that all changed. Now we can be merging, and we are seeing merging on the economic, on the financial operative, politically, socially, trade-wise, all over the world. And this is happening. And this is where I said I had to bring up something. I'm sure you've mentioned on here Anatoly Golitsyn. This is my apologies. My book of his is jam-packed, full of.
Tell folks about Anatoly Golitsyn.
Anatoly Golitsyn. This is his book, which came out in 1984, New Lies for Old. Anatoly Golitsyn was a Soviet KGB defector. And if you want to understand convergence, you really have to read Anatoly Golitsyn. He was not just your standard KGB agent. He worked for the inner KGB, the super secret part of the KGB that devised, developed, and implemented the long-range grand strategy of the Kremlin. And it's primarily using disinformation and agents of influence to help work together with globalists in our government to bring about convergence, to create the impression that communism had died, had fallen away, had collapsed, and that now we had an opportunity for the first time in the world to build up Russia, China, and the other communist countries into get rid of the hostility and the potential for war, and bring about peaceful coexistence and help them become more free enterprise capitalists. But that isn't what has been happening. We have been moving in their direction. We have been becoming more socialist, more government controlled, more centralized, more command and control economy.
And they've acted like they were reforming, but now they've reversed back. And it's the very same globalist above it all. And just like the elite-funded radical communist groups and socialist groups since the time of Karl Marx, they're now claiming they're fighting al-Qaeda, but meanwhile funding them and using that as the threat to take our liberties domestically.
So this is accelerating right now, and unfortunately, most Americans have no idea what is going on here. I mentioned his book, New Lies for Old. It's still available. We have it online. Again, my apologies. This is his most recent book, The Perestroika Deception.
For radio listeners, it looks like it's been shot with a shotgun. There's so many notes in it. It's dog-eared books.
But I mean, he has been in the forefront of exposing what has been happening, particularly in detail, showing that all of the so-called reforms going back 50 years and showing the various phony splits in communism and the split between Russia and China, how all of those were very elaborate, staged events, and how he primarily shows the staging from the Soviet side. What he doesn't show, and what we have been in the forefront of showing, is how this cooperation has taken place from the leaders and the globalists on our side in Europe and the United States to make this convergence possible. And that is where we are headed. All of the various communist countries of Eastern Europe, who supposedly have now...
Sure, well, they admit, I mean, UKIP admits that they've taken all the old Soviets and made them the new EU bureaucracy that's unelected and above the law. You can be in the EU parliament, but you have no voting power. They admit it's a new Soviet, and even the new flag they came out with for Europe has all these symbols in it, and the hammer and sickle is in there. This is what they're doing.
Well, I just had a new article that we posted yesterday that I wrote that I'm sure very little of the Western media, particularly here in the United States, covered it. And the title is, it's up on our website now at thenewamerican.com, Killers on the Loose. Croatia arrests communist spy chief in 1983 murder case. Now, Croatia is one of the new republics, supposedly a sovereign nation, which came out of communist Yugoslavia. There were 8 republics within communist Yugoslavia, which was cobbled together during World War II, after World War II, and Marshal Josip Broz Tito was put in charge there. And this was one of the first phony splits in communism that Golitsyn very capably details for us in his books. Tito was arranged to be the independent communist. And our foreign policy establishment, the Council on Foreign Relations, in the Eisenhower administration, in the Roosevelt administration, and in successive Republican and Democratic administrations, praised Tito as this great ally of the West.
Sure, they always create artificial choices, fake selections. It's the oldest trick in the book.
But he was a communist thug, a totalitarian mass murderer. And one of his murderers was Josip Perkovic. And Perkovic is still alive. He was just arrested on January 1st, finally, on a European arrest warrant from Germany in a case in which he had been in charge, the mastermind of an assassination of a Croatian nationalist who had fled Croatia, fled Yugoslavia.
It's incredible. It shows how our government was backing people that were killing libertarian, nationalist, patriot-type people. It's just incredible. William F. Jasper, we're going to have to get you back on in a month or so for part 2 of Convergence. Amazing. People can find out more at newamerican.com, thenewamerican.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Folks, we're out of time for this edition. Nightly News Tonight. 7 o'clock Central. Briefly, I want to thank our sponsor that made this transmission possible this hour. The top-rated customer service, top-quality products, incredibly reasonable prices. MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex to find the discounts and specials. Non-GMO, high-quality. Folks that stand up to the FEMA and the globalists and won't sell to them. Just great folks. MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex. To find out more details and to check out not just the storable food, but all the other great preparedness products. MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex, specializing in the highest quality survival products. We should all want to be self-sufficient. The system doesn't want us to be self-sufficient. We've got to be self-sufficient. And InfoWars is a key platform to bring you all these scholars, all these researchers, all these people. Lastly, get your nascent iodine survival shield. I take it every day for my thyroid and overall body health. You've heard the incredible reviews from listeners. There's nothing else out there like it. InfoWarsLife.com. We also have the fluoride shield with nascent iodine and 5 other key compounds developed by Dr. Group. InfoWarsLife.com or 888-253-3139.
You are listening to GCN. Visit GCNlive.com.
Small dollop of overdrive coming up. Please stay tuned. Former head of DARPA wants you to swallow ID microchips. About 2 years ago, we carried several news articles where these companies were coming out with ID chips by law, is what they're lobbying for, to be in all the pills, because especially if it's a narcotic, we've got to track that you're carrying it, what you're doing. The new G4-enabled cars have to give you tickets. RFID is to surveil the living daylights out of you. Or the cops will claim, I had a scan that you were carrying, you know, a bunch of Percocet or whatever. I love how they push all this stuff on people and then use it to put you in jail. Google executive also pushes e-tattoo that reads your mind. This is the bizarro info from the globalist. I mean, it's like the power of the gods, the fire of the gods being given to psychopaths. All this stuff that could totally empower humanity is being given the worst, most oppressive systems out of the gates. So that story is up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. There's more articles out today. One in AP about a $2 billion fine that J.P. Morgan Chase is going to pay for trillions of scams. So can I go rob a bank of $1 million and pay the cops a tip of, you know, 1,000? I mean, it's just, that's how the justice system works. They've announced the FBI is going to do nothing, basically, in white-collar crime. They're only going to target people politically for made-up stuff. So, I mean, you call the FBI, millions could be getting stolen. They won't help you. Nothing's going to help you anymore. It's just, you better use your wits, and you better stand up to people, and soon you're going to have to get justice yourself. But that's the greatest crime in England. If you fight back against an attacker, you're going to prison. Because, and that's the same thing here with the social engineers. Never fight back against a bully. Never stand up. Being a man, being honorable, stands against the criminals. But how is our nation, how is the elite itself? You know, it's come out that Google, Microsoft, all the big globalist groups, cybersecurity tried to take them over last year. That's in Wired magazine. Because they were always part of the same group. But once you create a centralized system, it's not about production anymore. It's about controlling that centralized system, and then you control it all. And it creates a very, very nightmare-type scenario. It is totally unfulfilling. I mean, here's an example. Everybody knows you spoil your kids, give them everything they want, let them boss you around, they'll turn into monsters. You make them work hard, you make them do their chores, you discipline them, you make them exercise, they're good children. And I myself, I got good kids, but they're somewhat spoiled, and I've learned to crack down on them, and they're happier, better people. And the government is just completely spoiled out of control. These corporations are completely spoiled out of control. And they're mentally ill, believing we poison the water and we geoengineer because we're God. And all of our resources down here on the ground builds the cogs to run this alternate breakaway civilization and government where these people can do whatever they want and play God and enjoy the fruits of human intellect and human development. These globalists all have horrible families. They're totally unhappy on average. They have high suicide rates. If you're a globalist New World Order minion, you're unhappy because you're not following the true human code of fulfilling our destiny, of being honorable, of being good, of trying to build a better world. And you've used your intelligence to engage in fraud and engage in deceit, and you're creating a political vortex, a political black hole that we know have destroyed civilizations, empires, and billions of people in the last 6,000 years. Governments killed 200+ million last century alone. I'm rounding down from 262 million non-military deaths. And now with all the super technology, super science, it's literally science fiction, Hanna-Barbera type stuff, we'll be lucky if we don't destroy ourselves in the near future.